We got to talk about it. Vincent Kennedy McMahon. We've been waiting for this documentary supposedly about Vince McMahon, Mr. McMahon on Netflix. It came out recently, and I myself got to be honest, it wasn't what I expected. I don't think it was anything like anybody expected. It was just a class on WWE and their controversies in general. And like what we learned about Vince McMahon, although there were a couple of things, and I'm sure we'll get to those, it was just very little. And so, I mean, I like the documentary. Like any friend that I have that knows nothing about wrestling, I will point them to this documentary in the future. But for us, for everybody that's watching this video right now, I don't think we'll learn anything new at all. But that's my thoughts on it. Big Ohm, what do you think about this documentary?
I tend to agree in that if you're a wrestling fan, then you walked out of this not really learning much. And it's a product of two things. Number one, it's something that was made really more so for the general public than it was for like wrestling fans. But I will say this, the biggest thing that this did offer was, I think, for the first time, a more like in-depth and focused like perspective from Vince McMahon, the person, right? Like, we had the things about him growing up. We had learned about, things that we had heard about. He did a Playboy interview where he had talked about being abused in the past. Yeah. And then that was also brought up. And he even mentioned incest in that documentary, which, it's horrible. But he spoke about it really for the first time. So there were those nuggets. There was that story about Shane and Vince that we can talk about because I thought one of the most interesting dynamics that was explored there was that between like Shane and Vince. And then like, if you go back and like look at it really, like it's almost like a different form or, you can see like the generational trauma, for lack of a better term, that goes from like Vince Sr. to Vince Jr. to Shane and how that's kind of impacted the family. And then it got into, in the last part, the scandals that broke in 2022, and of course we've covered that in the past, but I thought if there was ever a quote unquote fair like docu-series about Vince McMahon that told you generally most of the things you need to know about him, this was probably it. I will say this, one person, and then I'll stop my diatribe. One person who I thought did come across looking really bad in this outside of Vince McMahon was Bruce Pritchard. Like he looked, I mean, he it's not only from a standpoint of like, that final interview he gave where right before the Grant lawsuit dropped, where he was like, I think you guys got the wrong picture, but like it was also just throughout, like look, if there's anyone who's going to be favorable to Vince McMahon, it's two people. It's Hulk Hogan and Bruce Pritchard. They were always going to get their perspectives, but Bruce was Bruce, I thought, came across looking pretty bad throughout that, from both a factual standpoint and like, just around the allegations as well.
Yeah, he was right about one thing though when he said when on his last tirade, like this was a documentary about everything else and not Vince McMahon himself as a person, not as a human, like be good to him or anything. Like I wanted to learn much more about his childhood and everything like that, and we just got so little. But what do you want to say?
The thing is, though, Vince said this at the beginning of the docuseries. He's only going to tell you as much as he wants to. Yeah. And as at the end of the day, that's like all you can. If that's all you can pry out of him, and like you're gonna have to tell the bigger story of the business. And at the end of the day, like if there's one thing that's true about Vince McMahon, I think more than his family, more than himself, more than anything, he loved the business, quote unquote. His obsession with the business was, I think, second to none. So you can't really tell the story of Vince McMahon without telling the story of WWE. And better or worse, a lot of it was for worse in my view, but you can't really separate those two. That's why I think you saw such a focus of WWE, because that was his life. That was his life.
Well, I mean, you're right about that. And Kenny, I'm gonna get to you in a second, but like he said a couple of things about his life, and sure, it was little, but my thing is also like how many of those things that he said is factually correct. You know what I mean? I don't like Dave Meltzer there. He spoke way too much, but like he was the only one really just like talking about the facts. He was really most like knowledgeable person there about like all the minute details, which was crazy. Like, come on,
93,000 people in the Superdome, brother.
Like he was the only one to call it out.
Andre told me, slam.
So, Kenny, what do you think about all of that and the fact that we once again testified that Hulk Hogan is an absolute snitch?
A snitch? Oh, I don't know, man. I don't know. I got to give Hogan his respect for this one because he actually didn't snitch.
Really?
He went in there and he was like, he didn't snitch. They pulled him in there and he said, like, he went and he kind of bamboozled them. They expected him to kind of go all out on Vince McMahon, but he was like, nah, he wasn't providing us steroids. I never saw him give it. I think that might have been a deciding factor for Vince to get off on everything.
Okay.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the union thing.
Yeah.
The union thing, he totally snitched on the union.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. He's a snitch on that one. And that's the problem with a lot of jobs, though, because, like, if everybody tries to get together, there's always going to be somebody who's like, I'm going to the boss to tell them what's going on. Then all of those people get fired. So, unfortunately, Hogan was just that rat, as you would expect him to be. But I respect him for what he did on the steroid trial. I think that was some real stuff.
It was interesting, yeah,
But I mean, the documentary as a whole, even though like we are all wrestling fans, so yes, we all know this stuff, but like, you know, somebody who's not deep in the weeds and knows what's going on in wrestling, I think this was made for them, and I think it was very entertaining. Whether I knew all of this stuff or not, like the Ring Boy scandal, I really didn't know anything about that. But I mean, another thing is they said this was going to paint Vince in a real bad light, and you know, he was trying to buy it out because he didn't want anybody to see it, but I don't think it painted him in a bad light at all. I mean, things happen in history, and a lot of the bad things that they were saying happened. Vince McMahon wasn't directly involved in it. It was the people around him. So we can talk about it, but I actually kind of, you know, I respect Vince's business aggression that he had in this thing.
Well,
so, hey, he built the empire, and this showed us exactly how he did it. So there's some good stuff in here. There's some bad stuff in here. But at the end of the day, this is where WWE came from.
Well, Big I want to throw it back at you, pause, but like, I also want to combine it with the question. This whole debacle of Vince McMahon trying to buy this thing, do you think it's actually real, or was it just another, you know, stunt, a PR stunt? Look, Vince McMahon is trying to buy this, so watch this, you know, it's that crazy. Do you think it was real, or, you know?
I 100% believe that Vince McMahon at some point made it reached out to try to purchase this. I would believe that. I think because like here's the thing. There's two sides to this, right? There's Netflix's PR side and there's like Vince McMahon's PR side, right? Vince McMahon at this point, any PR, any focus about, you know, his past scandals, his current scandals, all these controversies, the lawsuits, any focus on that in the media is bad. It is horrible for him. Like in the court of public opinion, that's going to only lead to more and more, you know, calls of you know, the calls that Vince McMahon is a horrible human being, right? So for him, and as someone who Vince McMahon, he has a lot of liquid cash at this point. He cleaned out his stocks for WWE. Whoa. He's got a bunch of cash laying around. It's all there. He could buy like Disney World at this point if he really wanted to. So like there's that aspect of it. Like he has a lot of cash. He could have done it if Netflix wanted it to, but for Netflix, right? I think it's a two-parted thing. Number one, even if Vince McMahon did offer like them, let's say like hundreds of millions of dollars, even if it's more than the amount they're going to get back on this, setting that precedent for them is horrible because at the end of the day, that puts their future docuseries, their future documentaries in doubt, because at that point you're setting the precedent that like, oh, anyone can just buy themselves like away from Netflix like criticism or documentary. So I get that, and like, look, he reached out, and if that's what happened, and Netflix is like, well, we can use this to get some extra eyeballs, get some interest. That's just good strategy from my point.
Yeah, you're right.
And you know what? Vince, he's a wrestling promoter. So right before this thing comes out, he posts that statement on X. I think it's all a work. He's doing that to try to draw eyes to the docuseries as well, I believe, because, again, I don't think they said anything really damning about him in this thing.
Nothing that we already didn't know, besides a couple of sliver of information, I would say.
The interesting thing to me, and I want to get your guys' thoughts on this, is like for the Ring Boy scandal, because that's the thing that like genuinely I think most wrestling fans don't know the most about. Yeah. Like it's one of those scandals you kind of hear about, but you're like, what really happened? And like it's covered in the docuseries. I won't get too deep into it, but Muchnick, who was one of the journalists who was interviewed for this and has like a very, very big history with Vince McMahon, to say the least. One of the original ways that like he got in Vince McMahon's like ire was through like a series of publications around the Ring Boy scandal, where this WWE official by the name of Mel Phillips was at first fired by WWE and by Vince McMahon for allegedly assaulting and inappropriate misconduct with younger boys. And then Vince McMahon fired him because of that and admitted to firing him because of that, and then rehired him quietly later. So it's like one of those things where I feel like that aspect of it probably could have been covered. And had that been, I think that would have honestly, especially in the climate that we live in today, right? Like where there's a large focus on that. It coming out of like, there a lot of these stories about trafficking from, high profile and rich figures, and especially with minors. Like that is something that I think would have been even more damning had they focused in on it more. And I think the Ring Boy scandal is like something that probably needs its own deep dive at this point. Not from a, oh my God, like a salacious story, whatever. It's like a genuine, like I think information that many wrestling fans have been like asking for, but we haven't really gotten a lot of answers from or a deep dive into. But that's like my one thing from that.
Well, I mean, that's like very much telling of the documentary itself. Like there's a lot of interesting subjects that we should definitely dive into, but they kind of mention it and they move away. So overall, like we said, it's a pretty good documentary, especially to show to your friends that don't know much about wrestling. But I think we were all expecting more, especially new information. But so in that sense, for me, it's a little bit disappointing.
What about the story of Vince telling Shane to kill him?
See, that's
oh
stuff.
Man, that was new. Come on, man, it's mafia boss stuff.
Yeah.
You want this? Here, take this knife. You're gonna have to kill me to get it. And he wasn't playing because he sold the company and did not give it to Shane McMahon. So, it's some pretty deep family stuff there.
Yeah, but like, didn't his father give him basically a pretty good deal?
Yeah,
Vince McMahon Sr.
Vince McMahon bought WWE for a little over $1 million in like 1984, and it was like in a few payments. So he basically got like the biggest sweetheart deal that you could have. Like Vince's dad essentially gave him WWF when you really think about it.
Yeah,
because I think it was overblown. Vince is a promoter, as Kenny said. He's gonna overblow everything. He's gonna make it look like like he fought back from something. But at the end of the day, I don't think. It is insane when you hear like those stories about like, Vince Sr. and, Vince going in for a hug when the first time he met his dad, and his dad just being like,
nope,
pat on the back. And that's all you get. It's crazy. And I think, again, it's something that like permeated into that relationship. And if there's anyone who like comes out of this, like you feeling sympathetic for at all, I think it's Shane.
It is. You're right.
Ironically enough. But
at the same time, it did like definitely solidify in my mind that, Shane is very, very nice as opposed to Vince. Yeah, Vince is overblowing everything. But if he ever wanted to take over the WWE, like Shane would have to be like Vince, be heartless, don't care about the consequences, and literally
I don't think so.
Go in for the kill. You don't think so?
I mean, I just don't think that's the only way to do business. I think it's proven that you can do business in a way where you respect other people and you listen to good ideas and you don't turn people down. Like, here's the thing. It's like, if we're talking about the extremes, right? Yeah, sure. Like, you can't be too nice. You can't be too Vince.